Happy Father's Day to all the dads in the room. I know that just like we say on Mother's Day, and I think it should be said on Father's Day too, sometimes these days are really complicated. It's hard to find the middle ground sometimes. If today is not the most happy of days for you, you're thinking of a loved one that you've lost, or maybe just relationship with dad wasn't great. And we just want you to know that the church walks with those who are celebrating, just like we walk with those that may be mourning this morning. And so our thoughts and prayers are with all of you as we dive in this morning. What I want to do is kind of loop back around to what we did on Mother's Day. So I said we were going to do two parts, and on Mother's Day we talked about legacy from that perspective. But just like that sermon was really more applicable to not just moms, but everybody, I'm hoping that this morning will be the same thing as well. As we look at this idea of legacy, in fact, Pastor Jordan talked about this in our team huddle time this morning, how the reality is, as followers of Jesus, all of us are involved in leaving a legacy. We've all been invited into the legacy of Christ and to pass that legacy on. Just like we had a couple of families stand up here this morning and dedicate their kids, and then I asked the church family, hey, are you in on this with us, right? You know, this is part of the legacy. But dads have a particular role to play in legacy. And I'm going to look at that through the lens of leadership and through the lens of one of the Bible's great leaders this morning. But I want you to know that I'm not talking about leadership on Father's Day just because it's the male version of this, right? It's not to make a statement that men are the leaders and women are not. That is not our perspective here. This is more to say that dads do have a particular role in leadership, and it's a very practical piece of theology. Because did you know that, like, if a child comes to Jesus as the first follower of Jesus in their family, the family is only 1 in 50 likely to also become followers of Jesus, okay? If mom is the first follower of Jesus, and she's faithful and she attends church, but dad does not come, the kids are about 25% likely to follow Jesus in their adult life. But if dad is the first follower and dad is regular about his engagement with his faith journey, his children are 70% likely to follow in his footsteps. 70% likely. This is just a statistic that we know. And I can't tell you exactly why it is that way, but it is that way. And so dads, like, I hope that we'll dial in together, because the stakes on our spiritual lives are high, right? The stakes on leaving legacy for the next generation are high for dads. And I just want to talk a little bit about this morning about what it looks like to be a good leader and to leave a great legacy for our kids, our churches, our communities, our world, in the name of Jesus. And we're going to do that through the lenses of the story of Joshua. Many of you will be familiar with who that is. He is one of the more prominent characters in the Old Testament. He follows as leader of Israel right behind Moses. And it's very significant, right? Because Moses is one of the most important leaders that Israel ever had. He was the first leader that they had as a nation. He is, in the book of Matthew, so often paralleled with Jesus' own work, right? That there are many things that Jesus does in the book of Matthew that are supposed to draw our mind and our attention to Joshua. Jordan, are we okay with this microphone? Great. Awesome. We tried the bad one again. We think we fixed it. Just good to make sure before we keep going. Lots of things that the writer of Matthew points out with relation to Jesus is supposed to show us how Jesus is taking the mantle that Moses had and moving forward with it and doing it the way that it probably should have been done. So to take over for Moses as leader of Israel, this was a crucial passing of the baton that we're talking about. And the first thing that Joshua has to do, remember, so Moses leads the people out of slavery in Egypt, and God promises a land that will be for themselves, their own. The promised land, it's called. And they walk right up to the border of the promised land, and God sends out a representative from every tribe of Israel to scout out the land and to tell them about this land that God is going to give them. And all 12 men go out, and they scout, and they come back, and 10 of the 12 men are so afraid of what they see that their advice is, there's no way we can take over this land. There's no way we can live here. The enemies are too great. Caleb and Joshua are the only two men who encouraged the nation of Israel after that scouting trip to do what God has promised them to do, to enter the land and to take it for their own. And so, because the people don't go in, they end up spending the next 40 years chasing their own tail in the desert. And Moses leads them through that process. But when the time in the desert is finished and God is ready to let them try again, God isn't ready to let Moses have that baton of leadership. Moses' time is finished. Moses passes away, and the baton of leadership goes to Joshua. And Joshua's first order of business is to get his people to cross the Jordan River. Just a couple of weeks ago, I went on a trip up near 100 Mile House, and we have an electric vehicle, so we had to stop in Hope to charge up. It was our first stop. First time we've tried to do this long distance trip. And so we get out, we plug the car in, and we walk across the road. It's at the Dairy Queen in Hope, if you know where that is, right? There's a bunch of chargers there. We jump across the street. It's very early in the morning, so we could do it safely. And we stop, and we're looking at where the river flows past Hope there. And my kids notice how active the waters are, that they're spinning and swirling. You guys have all seen this. We can see it every day. We go down and look at the Fraser here. But this just comes to my mind because my kids were like, Dad, look at the whirlpools. I was like, yeah, do you think that it would be safe to get in the water? And they were like, I don't know. Would it be safe to get in the water? Maybe it would be fun. And I'm like, it would absolutely not be safe for you to get in the water. Let me make that abundantly clear. Because the water is moving so quickly that it would just take you where it wants to go, and you would have no control. You don't have enough strength to swim upstream. Daddy doesn't have enough strength to swim upstream. It would be very, very dangerous to get in the river. Joshua's first order of business is to lead people across the Jordan River, which was about 10 feet deep and 100 feet wide at the harvest time that this story is taking place. And the waters would have been moving very fast. In other words, it was dangerous. The very first thing that God asked Joshua to do was lead the people on a dangerous journey. Can you imagine having to be the first person whose foot went in that water? Hold on to that thought. Joshua has to convince the people that they can do it. That before they can even remember, their experience here is like, hey, that land isn't safe already, and you want me to do this super dangerous thing just to get into the land that's super dangerous? That doesn't seem like a very good idea. That must have been a tall task for Joshua. What made him ready to lead in the moment that he was called to lead in? Well, I would say that there's at least a few things that we can learn from Joshua's life about how to develop our own leadership capacity and how to be the kind of people that can lead and leave a legacy. And the first thing I think that we pick up from Joshua is that great leaders start out as great followers. Great leaders always start out as great followers. You look back in Joshua's story, that's exactly what happened to him. He was one of the only two people who had seen the land, who were willing to actually follow God and do what he said. It's really funny because this kind of parallels something that Jesus said, didn't it? In Matthew chapter 20, Jesus said, whoever wants to be great among you has to serve first. When I think about this, I think about my experience. I think about my dad. The church that I grew up in was very small. I think we're going to show a picture of it here. Maybe. Hopefully it's not too pixelated. This was the little church in Nova Scotia that I grew up in. Cute. Thank you. It is cute. It's special to me. Actually, this is the bigger version of the church. When we got there, the whole front section that's got the, see how the roof goes two different ways? Those are two different phases of building for our church. So that front section wasn't there. All it was you went through a door and there was a little, vestibule and a set of stairs that went down into the dungeon that we did kids ministry in. And Pastor Tim got spanked in many, many times. and then it was the 80s, guys. It was perfectly acceptable. And then there was a doorway into the sanctuary, and there was a middle aisle, and there were two things, and there were about 30 people going to church there when my dad took it. It was his second job as a pastor ever. He had graduated from school 4 years before, was given the opportunity to come and pastor this church of 30 people when he got there. And it holds such a special place in my heart. But what I want to tell you about is how that second section got built. Because as my dad was there and people started coming to the church, and we grew and they doubled and then tripled in size, which still only meant we were 90 people. But hey, tripling in size sounds better than 90, right? So we say we tripled in size. And we realized that the little building we had wasn't going to accommodate all the things that we wanted to do. And so as churches often do, we saw this as a calling from God to do something, to add to our facility so that we could accommodate more people and do more good things and help other people find life in Christ. And so because we were only 90 people, here's what happened. We had the money for the materials, but not the money for the labor. We could raise the money to buy the stuff, but not put it together. And I remember, I have this image burned in my mind coming around. So my house, so this dirt driveway goes around and behind the building, and like right behind that chimney is the house that I grew up in, like probably 50 yards from the back door of the church. And I remember coming around the driveway one day, and here's my dad, long after work hours are finished, changed into his best work clothes, which mean they were his worst clothes, covered in dirt, sweating like a pig, straddling two beams that were to create the ceiling/floor for the new church. He had worked all day long and then changed, got his hammer out, and fortunately for us, he was one of the unique pastors in the world that actually does have the skill of building things while being a pastor. Because if we ever decide to do a building campaign, it will not be Jordan or I who's building the church. And that's not because we're not willing. It's because you don't want us to do it at all. I mean, we're willing and we're capable and we will sweat and we will do this, but you don't want us to build anything. My dad left this beautiful legacy through his servanthood, that he would spend all day doing the work that he was paid to do, and then spend several hours every night swinging his hammer and putting things together. My dad had the reputation of being someone who didn't just want to be up here telling people what to do, but when it was time to get busy and time to get dirty, he was right there just as enthusiastically as anybody else. I've heard other great stories about this. A pastor one time at a conference I went to stood up here and told us that as part of his job as dad in his house, he is proudly the family garbage man. It is his job to take out the trash every single day, and he does it with enthusiasm. And he told these beautiful stories about how God has introduced him to his neighbors as he did one of the jobs that nobody wants to do in the house. Does anybody's garbage ever get so full that you're annoyed by how full the garbage is? That's how we figure out who's going to take out the trash in our house. The person who gets annoyed the most by how full the garbage can is takes the garbage out. If you're the last person who can't set their garbage on the top, then you go and take the garbage out. In the book Good to Great, Jim Collins talks about the necessary ingredients to be what he calls a level 5 leader. And very, maybe surprisingly to us, because we have this relationship with leadership that says, no, the people with the most bravado and the biggest voice and the most personality, they're the greatest leaders. And actually what Jim found as he went through his studies on leadership, decided that servant leadership is as important or more important than any other quality for success. So look, if you're one of the people here this morning that got drugged here because your family came and you didn't really mean to be here, it's okay, you're welcome here. We're so glad that you're here, so enthused and excited that you would spend some time with us this morning. But even if you don't buy into this Jesus thing, this idea of serving as a way to be a great leader goes into the very fabric of human DNA. And even when we try to figure out why corporations do what they do, we can't help but get away from the fact that great leaders are servants first. So dads, let your kids catch you serving. Find intentional ways to burn images into your kids' minds that they'll never forget, that encourage them to get low, that encourage them to get down and dirty and do the work that needs to be done. Great leaders start out as great followers, and they serve. The second thing we learn from Joshua's life is that great leaders are defined ultimately by who they follow. Who you set up and what you set up in your life as the most important things will define the person that you're becoming. We know this in terms of our friendships, right? We know that if you spend time with people, those people will influence you. Similarly, the people that you set up in your life as the ones that you're following, as the people that you idolize, as the people that you put on pedestals, and the things that you do with your time and your attention will determine the kind of person and leader that you become. It was clear in Joshua's life that he had chosen to follow in the footsteps of Moses, but more importantly, in the footsteps of God. It says this in Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide. The Lord spoke to Joshua. In other words, Joshua and God had a relationship, an intimate relationship, a relationship that Joshua chose to make the most important relationship in his life. And I just wonder, dads, like, there are so many things vying for our identity and our attention. Who or what is at the top of your pyramid? This past month, I spent probably an inordinate amount of time securing for myself a guitar that I had owned previously. In other words, I bought the same guitar twice. Don't laugh at me like that. It's perfectly normal. It was the one that got away. You know, I had owned it, and I had played it, and I had enjoyed it, and I had an opportunity to sell it for a profit. And I did, and then about 3 months later, I was like, this is a really bad idea. You know, one of the funny things about that process is that I found myself thinking about giving that guitar to one of my kids. In other words, making it a part of my legacy to them. And in prepping for this sermon, I just had to stop and go, yeah, but how much time this month did I think about securing a spiritual legacy for my kids? Did I spend even close to the same amount of time? Now look, I don't want to crap all over everybody's, don't laugh at me when I say things like that. Make my wife uncomfortable. My email address is tim@burnettchurch.com. You can send me an email later. I don't mean to put down the things that we do for enjoyment, okay, wholeheartedly. Like, don't hear me say that, because, you know, there's this version of Christianity that's like, one of the fruits of the Spirit is grumpiness, and we're never allowed to enjoy anything, and we all have to be super guilty that we were born in Canada, and like, I just, you know, I don't think that's true. But sometimes I think it is important for us to stop and ask ourselves the question, like, do the people outside my life, my kids, my friends, the people that follow me on social media, do they know? Like, if you jumped on my social media feed, would you know that Jesus is important to me? You know? Or would they just see that I love golf a lot? You know? Would the legacy I'm leaving be, you know, a sub 100 golf score? It seems like that's sometimes what we're shooting for. Sometimes what we're making most important. And I know it sounds a little bit silly, but think about it, you know, because I'm right there with you, right? Am I spending as much time concerned about the legacy that I'm passing to my kids spiritually, dads who follow Jesus, as I did on that crazy guitar this month? Yeah, the answer is no in my life. Can I just be like totally honest with you? No. The answer is no. And it should bother us when we figure it out. It should bother us when we figure it out. If we want to leave a legacy for our kids, if we want our kids to follow in our footsteps, it has to be really, really clear where we're going and why we're going there. 70% of our kids will follow if and when we decide to follow. So have conversations with your kids, dads, about Jesus. When they ask you that question at night, when you're tucking them in, and you know it's really just a ploy not to go to sleep, but it happens to be about spiritual things, do it. Don't rush the tucking in. Don't value their sleep and your time above the conversation that's about to happen. Let them catch you serving. Let them catch you praying. Make it really, really abundantly clear that it's God who set our path. Joshua chapter 3, verse 11. Joshua is giving instructions to the people as they're going to cross the Jordan. And Joshua's confidence in what's about to happen comes from this verse. See, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. The Ark of the Covenant, if you're not familiar with this, was the thing that carried the very essence and presence of God amongst the people of Israel. And so it literally is saying God, the Lord of all the earth, is going to go into that river ahead of you. The guy who had to put his foot in first, he was one of the priests, right? The priests at the front who were carrying the ark, they were the guys who had to go in. But they all decided that it was worth the risk. Why? Because they were confident in the one that they were following. They had decided that God was worth trusting. And they set their path. They defined what was important. They chose their identity based on him. And it's the same calling that we're given. Right? Jesus had a very simple invitation. He came to his followers and he just said, come on, follow me. That was it. That was the invitation. It was that simple. Come and follow me. Let me be the one who shows you how to live. Let me be the one who defines who you are. Let me be the one who shows you the path. And then what that means is our third thing that we learn from Joshua is that you can't just hear and say and nod your head, yes, Jesus, I'll do what you're asking me to do and I'll follow you. But great leaders, they walk their talk. And it takes courage, by the way. My grandfather passed away when I was very young. I was 4 years old on my dad's side. He was a Navy mechanic. My my dad and his brother and those friends of theirs from that era in their life tell hilariously dysfunctional stories about their childhood. It was amazing. It probably sprung from a few things. You know, the whole military thing, and my grandpa would be gone for like months at a time on aircraft carriers fixing Sea King helicopters. You can thank my grandpa, by the way, for the Sea Kings actually lasting as long as they did in the military, right? I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but anyway, it was him who worked on them in the early days and kept them going and kept the maintenance up. And so he would leave and go on aircraft carriers for 3, 4, 5 months at a time, and my grandma would be left to try to wrangle these two, what we would for sure call hyperactive ADHD boys, all on her own. And when my grandpa would come back, and he would try to step in as the authority figure, because that's what he thought he was supposed to do. And when things were going poorly, he would say this to them: don't do as I do as I say. Anybody ever heard that in their house before? If you're here with your dad, don't put your hand up. Because I only say it as a joke in our house. It's become a bit of a hear-about meme. My dad said it to me, on multiple occasions. But here's the thing I figured out. Even if I say it to my kids, I'll put myself in this category. It's like the lowest version of parenting ever. It's seriously not the way that we're supposed to parent. I think everybody knows that deep down in their heart, but we're just so out of control in a moment that we're trying to get our kids to behave. And so we say, don't do as I do as I say. Look, that's not actually the way that it works. Because what we need to do is set the path for those who are coming behind us. This is what legacy is all about. This is what leadership is in a large portion about, right? Setting a path, showing people how to walk. Come after me, do as I do, and then maybe what I say will carry weight. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 6, as God was preparing Joshua, these are maybe the most famous words from the book of Joshua. He says, Joshua, this is God speaking to Joshua as he's getting ready to take over this mantle of leadership. Be strong and courageous. In fact, he says it to him 3 times in a row. Anytime that happens in the Bible, this is a cheat code for like understanding what's really important in a passage. If something starts getting repeated, tune in, dial in, listen up, be strong and courageous, because God knew, of course, what he was about to ask Joshua to do. Joshua, you are going to lead. Be strong and courageous. Why? Because you've got to get these people across that river and into that land that they don't want to go into. They're scared. They will be afraid. They don't have it in them right now. But maybe if we set the path clear, maybe if we show them what courage looks like, maybe then they'll come. Guys, what is it that's scaring us today out of setting the path that we know that we should set? What scares us enough to have us stop following Jesus in the ways that he wants us to go? Is it our relationships? Is something so broken in one of your relationships that you are tempted to take the easy road, to speak poorly about somebody, to return evil for evil, to not turn the other cheek, to not seek unity, to not pursue justice? Is that the thing in your life? I know it is sometimes for me. Is it the rising interest rates that are eating away at us? I know that's one of the things in my house. You know, that sometimes it seems easier to just keep everything for ourselves, to not be generous in the way that Jesus asked us to do, to not support the things that we value and want to support. That little church that I grew up in gave my dad a fairly little salary. And these are things I didn't really know about when I was a kid, you know, because good parents don't let their kids in on these kinds of things, right, when we're struggling. But they did the best that they could. And my dad felt called there, so he went and he did it. And we made ends meet. I remember seeing regularly when, you know, the extra spending money had run out, my mom and dad getting their checkbook out to write their tithe on a Sunday. You know, we weren't able to go do this, or we weren't able to do that, or we weren't able to participate in this, but man, they were never going to miss the things that were most important to them. They had defined their identity by who they follow, and they were going to walk the talk in our house. And I'm so grateful that they did. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 says, "Do not tire and become weary in doing good." It's hard. It's difficult. Imagine being the Levite, the priest, the man of God who had to carry that ark and be the first one to hit the water. Would you put your foot in first? Would I put my foot in first? Because the first guy in is going to test whether God does what he says he's going to do, right? He's either going to get sucked in by the whirlpool and sent downriver, or the waters are going to part, and God is going to be faithful to what he promised. Somebody's got to be brave enough to get out. You know, we always give the Apostle Peter a really hard time. Do you remember this story where God calls Peter out of the boat? It's a very similar thing. It's like, you got to do something super miraculous, Peter. Come, I'm walking on water. Come along. Come do it with me. And we give him such a hard time because he only makes it like 3 or 4 steps before he starts drowning. But there were 11 other dudes in the boat. They didn't even get out. They didn't have the guts to try to follow Jesus. Dads, put your foot in the water first. Be the first follower. Show your kids what it means to be strong and courageous, because you trust the one who called you to be strong and courageous. So, what do I want you to do with all this? In a minute, we're going to turn our attention to some baptisms. And that's a really exciting thing. But just before we kind of disengage from here, here's what I want to ask you to think about doing. Men, if any of this is any kind of like reorientation for you, I want to make sure you have something to do with it. So look, I was just speaking to one of our men this morning. Jordan and a few faithful guys, they meet for prayer every Thursday morning at 6 o'clock here in the church. God bless them. I'm not a morning person. I don't meet with them at 6 o'clock on Thursday morning. You are welcome to come and pray with Jordan and the other guys at 6 o'clock on Thursday morning. Yes, Jordan? I would encourage you to do that if you're a stronger man than I am. If you're a weakling like I am. On Wednesday nights at 7:30, starting 2 Wednesdays from now, myself and some other guys are going to get together here and pray and talk and just try to pursue Jesus together. We don't have a big flowery plan for it, but we think it's important to set aside the time. And so if you would like to join us, you can send me an email. Just let me know you're planning on coming. Hopefully by next week I'll have gotten my act together enough to get it on Planning Center. You could sign up for it. But for now, if that's something you want to do, if you don't have a group of guys that you're regularly connecting with and praying with, I would deeply encourage you, consider coming and connecting with us. And then we talk about Pathway all the time. We're going to continue to talk about Pathway. If you haven't gotten connected to that yet, it's a fantastic disciple-making resource. And the idea is that we give you some things to do that can help you walk your path over and over and over again. The information for that's available on our website. If anything seems confusing, you can get in touch with one of us. Thanks for spending your time with us this morning, church. We're so glad that God has brought together this community, that we together can work at leaving a legacy. I'm proud of the example that we're making for our kids, for our community, for our neighbors. And I hope that you'll continue to strive after that with me.